take supporting the ministry seriously. If you're a guest here today, we don't expect you to participate in this offering. We are going to be in the book of Esther today. And Esther is a great book, one of my favorites. And so if you turn to Esther, which is sandwiched in between Nehemiah and Job, if you wanted to know. And Esther is a book that is so exciting to me. It illustrates the providential dealings of God like no other book of the Bible. Although the name of God is not even mentioned in the text, you can clearly see the hand of God at work here. Providence is the continuous activity of God in his creation. The doctrine of providence affirms God's absolute lordship over his creation and confirms our dependence, the dependence of all creation on the Creator. And it's the denial of the idea that the universe is governed by chance or fate. Another definition says the divine intervention in the affairs of man to bring about God's objectives. The psalmist says the Lord has prepared his throne in heaven and his kingdom will rule over all. So in order to get a perspective of the book of Esther, we look to the book of Ezra. Ezra, in chapter 1, it tells us about the 70 years captivity and how Cyrus, the king of Persia, decrees that the Jews can be free and go to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. In another book of the Bible, Daniel mourns over this same prophecy of the 70 weeks. In chapter 9, God had revealed to Daniel that only 20% of all the Jews in captivity in Babylon would choose to leave given the opportunity. So 80% thought it better to stay in a pagan culture rather than return to Jerusalem to help rebuild the temple for the glory of God. And this rings true today. You know, although Christ has made it possible for all those who would call upon his name to be free, many choose to stay in bondage. You know, the Bible says that narrow is the gate and difficult is the way that leads to life, and there's just a few that find it. So, as you already probably know, Esther is one of two books named after women in the Bible. The other one is Ruth. And Ruth was a Gentile who married a Jew and became a vital part in the lineage of Christ. While Esther is a Jew who marries a Gentile, and she will have a vital part in saving the Jews from an attempted genocide. So, at this point of history, the Persians defeat the Babylonians to become the second great empire of the world. The Greeks would defeat the Persians later on and become the third, and the Romans would take on the Greeks and become the fourth great empire. Well, there are four main characters in the book of Esther. The first is Xerxes, or Ahasuerus. Sounds like a dinosaur, right? Ahasuerus is really more of a title than a name. It means venerable one. And he was king of Persia. His father was Darius and his grandfather, King Cyrus. The Persians were all about dominating the world. I mean, that was their thing, domination. And at this time, Xerxes, in his reign, he controlled from Ethiopia and Africa up to India and everything in between. So Ahasuerus had conquered the then known world besides Greece. So being a typical Persian leader, he sets out to conquer Greece because he's into the domination. He wants to dominate the world. So Ahasuerus sends 100,000 men on 600 ships to do so. But God's providence is far-reaching. There just happens to be a violent spring storm that arises and destroys 400 of the 600 ships. It was reported in history that King Ahasuerus was so angry at this that he beat the sea with his own belt. Ahasuerus kind of had a reputation of having an unstable temper. Well, we'll get to that a little later. The key verse here in Esther is found in chapter 4, verse 14. Don't turn there, but just listen. Perhaps you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. And we're going to revisit that a few times. And we're going to start in chapter 1, Esther chapter 1. As I said, it's sandwiched in between Nehemiah and Job. And so on the heels of this their navy being decimated, the king of Persia throws a 6-month State of the Union party at the palace, at the capital of Susa. So take a look at verses 1 through 5. And the events took place during the days of Ahasuerus, who ruled 127 provinces from India to Cush. In those days, King Ahasuerus reigned from his royal throne in the fortress of Susa. He held a feast in the 3rd year of his reign, and all the officials and the staff and the army of Persia and Media and the nobles and the officials from the provinces. He displayed his glorious wealth of his kingdom and magnificent splendor of the greatness of his greatness for a total of 180 days, 6 months. At the end of that time, the king held a week-long banquet at the garden courtyard of the royal palace for all people, from the greatest to the least, who were present at the fortress of Susa. So nobles and princes and staff numbered probably 2,000. And at the end of this 6-month meeting, a party ensued. I mean, a flat-out party. It seems odd for Ahasuerus to throw a party in this 6-month deal after this major disaster, but he was showing off that he had the money and the resources to have future battles, and he just liked to show off. At this point in history, at this point of the story, there was this party that was 7 days of drinking. And it was separate. The men were drinking, the women were elsewhere, and they were drinking for 7 days. In verse 7, it says, royal wine flowed freely according to the king's bounty, and no restraint was placed on drinking. And I know one thing that I observed about men, and when alcohol's involved, when men drink a lot, they get stupid. I mean, it's just it. We've all seen it. And so they get a little stupid. They start to ask for stupid things. Look at verse 10. On the 7th day, when the king was feeling good from wine, Ahasuerus commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abgatha, Zethar, and Carcass, easy for you to say, the 7 eunuchs who personally serve him, to bring Queen Vashti before him with her royal crown. He wanted to show off her beauty to the people and the officials because she was very beautiful. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command that was delivered by his eunuchs. The king became furious, and his anger burned within him. So, a king decides to tell the beautiful Queen Vashti to get all dolled up and parade in front of the drunk men. Vashti doesn't go. Girls, you know exactly why she refused to go, so you just check out for a moment. Let me tell the guys. There's several reasons. For one, she's angry to be even asked to do this, to parade in front of these drunken bums. She was afraid she may even get violated. And besides that, it's embarrassing and degrading to have to do this. So in any event, the king is hot under the collar and about the queen's disobedience. Did I mention that King Ahasuerus had an unstable temper? It's going to come into play here. So the king seeks advice from spiritual advisors, he calls them, about what to do about the insubordinate queen. And since drunk men give great advice, this seems like a good plan, and he goes forward. Now, these advisors were like astrologers, the same type that helped Pharaoh try to discover the troubling dreams he was having, and Nebuchadnezzar and others. So my question is, who do you seek for advice? Who do you seek for advice? Many times we ask advice from the worst possible people that we can possibly ask. When I asked a lady how to save costs on groceries, she said, I go around and dent the cans and open the boxes and then ask the manager for a discount. Now, my mother has since stopped doing that. And if I can see my wife, I'm not kidding. Where's Lori? It's true. She used to do that, but she has changed her ways. She's reformed of that. Yeah, and we take advice about child rearing from people whose children are rascals. We take money advice from people that have debt up to their eyeballs. We listen to life advice from people who don't even listen to God's advice. Well, listen to the Bible, what it says, for by wise guidance you will wage a war, and in abundance of counselors there'll be a victory. All right, so one of the trusted Persian advisors says, listen, this first lady not only embarrassed the king, but she has done all the men wrong in the province. When the news of the first lady's disobedience gets out, the women of Persia will show contempt for all their husbands, and the men of the kingdom are going to blame you. So they have a solution for women's lib here. Look at verses 19 and 20. If it meets the king's approval, he should personally issue a royal decree. Let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and Media, so that it cannot be revoked. Vashti is not to enter King Ahasuerus' presence, and her royal position is to be given to another woman who is more worthy than she. The decree of the king issued will be heard throughout the vast kingdom. All the women will honor their husbands from the least to the greatest. He liked this idea. Women's lib stopped right in its tracks. So Vashti's out, a replacement will be found later. We're in chapter 2, and there's a reversal of feelings. The king is lonely. Time has passed, and he's no longer as angry with Vashti as he once was before. Look at verses 1 following. For some time later, the king Ahasuerus' rage had cooled down. He remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he decided against her. The king's personal attendants suggested, let a search be made for beautiful women, young virgins that may be assembled, all the beautiful young virgins, to the harem in fortress at Susa, put them under the care of Higi, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of women, to give them the required beauty treatments. The young women who pleases the king will reign in place of Vashti. This suggestion pleased the king, and they did accordingly. So the staff sees the king's loneliness, suggests a Miss Media Persian beauty pageant, and so the pageant officials are appointed to local pageants like Miss India and Miss Ethiopia to find the best looking women in the land. And there'll be 100 finalists chosen. They'll be whisked to the Hotel Shushan, and the pageant official, which is this fella Higi, he'll give them the things they need to be their most beautiful. One lucky contestant will be crowned queen of Persia. The other 99 will be kept as concubine for the king's pleasure. So up until this point of the story, there's been nothing spiritual in the palace other than an evil spirit. But listen to this. I know this happens in your world too. But God will intervene and override in the affairs of man. God will have his way. He says of himself, I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, saith the Lord, which is and was, which is to come, the Almighty. Just remember that when you're feeling like the world's out of control. Well, the second character from the book of Esther is Mordecai. Mordecai is a Jew. He's from the tribe of Benjamin. He's actually related to King Saul, and Mordecai is the elder cousin of Esther. He raises Esther as his own after Esther's parents died. He has an official position in the government, and it would later show his loyalty to the king. The third and maybe most important character is Esther. Her Hebrew name, Hadassah, means star. And she certainly is. And Esther is beautiful on the inside and out, and this does not go unnoticed by the pageant officials. Look at verse 8. And when the king's command and edict became public knowledge, many of the young women gathered at the fortress at Susa under Higi's care. Esther was also taken to the palace and placed under the care of Higi, who was in charge of the women. So, I want you to notice something about this. Participation in the pageant was not a choice. They were taken to the palace. And we see God's providential work here in verse 9. The young woman, that is Esther, pleased him, Higi, and gained his favor. So he accelerated the process of the beauty treatments and the special diet she received. He assigned 7 hand-picked female servants to her from the palace and transferred her and the servants to the harem's best quarter. So she got special treatment. This isn't the first time that this kind of thing happened, that God gave special treatment. Daniel and his friends got special treatment from the eunuch, and Moses' daughter took special care of Moses, for certainly Joseph and Potiphar, etc. So, maybe there were times in your life where you were placed in favor of man. I mean, this is a special blessing of God. and it's never without purpose. If God places you in favor with man, it's not because you're awesome. Now, I'm sure you're a measure of awesome, but it's not because you're awesome. It's because there's a purpose in it, and that God gave you this favor with man, so don't waste it. So he gives Esther special attention. You know, there's plenty of drama in this book. You know, you got the war campaign drama and the struggle for world dominance. You got political drama with the 6-month powwow and then the drunken party that led to Esther's replacement. You got social drama, high stakes beauty pageant where 99 out of the 100 would be in the harem. And then you got spiritual drama. Look at verse 11. 10 rather. Esther did not reveal her ethnic background or her birthplace because Mordecai had ordered her not to. Every day Mordecai took a walk in front of the harem's courtyard to learn how Esther was doing and to see what was happening to her. So Mordecai and Esther were hiding their faith. You know, in this time of history, Syria was very anti-Semitic. And so I'm not in favor of Christians hiding their faith, believe me. But I will tell you this, that in some parts of the world, it's dangerous for people to know you're a believer. Many IMB missionaries must enter a closed country as a teacher or other trade and hide their true intentions of the government. Us here today, no excuse. We have no excuse to hide our faith. But in this case, there may have been a reason. So Mordecai nervously paces in front of the house where Esther is staying. She's checking on her. He loves her. He's concerned about her. He does not want her to be one of the 99. Look at verse 15, and we find out how it turns out. Esther obtains favor in the sight of all. She is the odds-on favorite. Like Daniel and his 3 friends were healthier and smarter and better looking than the rest. God had done this. This is God's providential dealing. The psalmist says, for promotion comes neither from the east, nor from the west, nor from the south, but God is the judge. He puts down one and sets up another. So think about it for a minute. You got Esther, an orphan Jewish girl. She's queen of the world and in a unique place. God's plan for Esther was to be in that place for that time, for that moment, for kingdom purposes. Mordecai puts it, perhaps come to the kingdom for such a time as this. How did she become queen? Was it fate? Was it chance? Or was she selected by God? It's hard to deny God's providence here. Well, does this mean that God is in favor of beauty pageants and harems and world domination? No. But God will intervene in the affairs of man. God will have his way. Well, after a feast in the honor of the new queen, Esther, king is in a good mood. He suspends taxes. He gives gifts. Mordecai gets promoted to the king's gate. Mordecai is now in a position to hear and see what the palace officials are up to. At this point, Esther has still not revealed that she's Jewish. Well, Mordecai does see some shenanigans going on in the palace. Look at verses 21 and following. This is in chapter 2. During the days of Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, again, they sound like dinosaurs, 2 eunuchs who guarded the king's entrance became infuriated and tried to assassinate, that is, plotted to assassinate King Ahasuerus. When Mordecai learned of the plot, he reported it to Queen Esther and then told the king on Mordecai's behalf. When the report was investigated and verified, both men were hanged on the gallows. This event was recorded in the court records, the daily events in the king's presence. So it was written in those chronicles. It says in verse 23, this was the official minutes of Persia, and this will turn out to be providential. Well, we're in chapter 3. We're buzzing along here. 5 years has passed since King Ahasuerus and Esther were married, and our 4th character is introduced here, the notorious Haman. Haman is a type of the Antichrist. He's just wicked. Look at verse 1 and 2. And all this took place. King Ahasuerus honored Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and promoted him in rank and gave him a higher position than all the other officials. The entire royal staff at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman because the king had commanded this to be done for him. But Mordecai would not bow down or pay homage. You know, Ahasuerus promotes Haman, the Agagite, to a commissioner prime minister. Haman should have never, ever existed. Should have never existed. Haman was a descendant of the wicked king Agag of the Amalekites, if that rings your memory. King Saul disobeyed the Lord when the Lord said to utterly destroy the Amalekites, and that's why Haman was still around. And you may say to yourself, why have there been Hitlers and Mussolinis and Hamans in the world? Don't worry. God will intervene and overrule in the affairs of man. He will have his way. So in verses 2 and 4, everyone is assembled to honor this new prime minister, bowing down and doing reverence, everyone but Mordecai. And everyone notices Mordecai's civil disobedience, including Haman. Look at verse 5 and 6. And when Haman saw Mordecai was not bowing down or paying homage, he was filled with rage. And when he learned of Mordecai's ethnic identity, Haman did not do away with Mordecai alone. He set out to destroy all of Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout Ahasuerus' kingdom. So Haman did not take the disrespect well. He was full of wrath. Haman had deep-seated hatred for Jewish people, and he was under control of Satan. There's just no question about it. You know, I need to say this. If you have deep-seated hatred for a people group, it is not motivated by God. All right? The only hatred God wants you to have is for sin. Okay? All right, let's move on. Verse 7. The first month of the month of Nisan in King Ahasuerus' 12th year, that is a lot. That's like casting a lot. You're familiar with that term. They cast before Haman for each day of each month, and it fell on the 12th month of the day of Adar. And so, what are they doing here? Well, Haman is literally casting lots, known as a pur, to determine what day to destroy the Jews. And the lot falls on March 13th. And take a look at verse 13. In verse 13, the letters written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the royal signet. Letters were sent by couriers to each of the royal provinces, telling officials to kill, destroy, annihilate all the Jewish people, young and old, women and children, plunder their possessions on a single day, the 13th day of Adar, the 12th month. So Haman goes in and tells King Ahasuerus, the Jews are defying the king's laws. It would be in your best interest to destroy them. The king signs the decree, which cannot be revoked. It says in Esther 8:8, a document written by the king's name and sealed with the signet ring cannot be revoked. So in 11 months from the signing of that decree, on the 12th month, 13th day, it would be legal to kill Jewish people and illegal to be alive if you are Jewish. That takes us to chapter 4. Well, Mordecai mourns at the gate. When we take a look at chapter 4, verse 1, and Mordecai learned all that had occurred. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, went into the middle of the city and cried loudly. He only went as far as the king's gate, since the law prohibits anyone from wearing sackcloth and entering the king's gate. There was great mourning among the Jewish people in every province, and the king's command and edict came. They were fasting, weeping, lamenting, many in sackcloth and ashes. So all the Jews of Providence are mourning, obviously, and very upset about it. Esther sends Hatak to find out what's wrong with Mordecai. She's sheltered. She doesn't know exactly what's going on. It says here in verse 5, Esther summons Hatak of the king's eunuchs assigned to her and dispatches her to Mordecai to learn what he is doing and why. She has no clue. Mordecai relays to Esther that through Hatak the evil plot that Haman was doing, and he wants Esther to intercede on the Jews' behalf. Look at verse 10 and following. And Esther spoke to Hatak and commanded him to tell Mordecai, all the royal officials and the people of the royal provinces know that one law applies to every man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court who has not been summoned, the death penalty. Only if the king extends his golden scepter will that person live. I haven't been summoned before the king for the last 30 days. So this was her response. It is risky to try to go before the king. If anyone goes before the king uninvited, they can be put to death. The exception, that scepter gets pushed forward, accepting that uninvited person. So the outcome of Esther's decision would have far-reaching consequences. Lives were at stake. Mordecai reminds Esther that this will affect her as well. Look at verse 13. Mordecai told the messenger to reply to Esther, "Don't think that you will escape the fate of all the Jews because you are in the king's palace. If you keep silent at this time, liberation and deliverance will come to the Jewish people from another place. But you and your father's house will be destroyed. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this." Esther sent a reply to Mordecai, "Go and assemble all the Jews who can be found in Susa and fast for me. Don't eat or drink for 3 days, night and day. I and my female servants will also fast in the same way. After that, I will go to the king, even if it's against the law. If I perish, I perish." So Mordecai did everything Esther had ordered him to do. I love the way Mordecai shows faith in God here. If you won't speak up for God, somebody else will. And that's true of us too. Christians, if you won't speak up for God, God will use somebody else. And if no man will speak up for God, creation will cry out. In fact, Jesus said in Luke 19, "I will tell you, if they were kept silent, the stones would cry out." God wants to use you. But if it's not you, if you won't open your mouth, he'll use another, or he'll use creation. So Mordecai suggests to Esther that God has placed her here for this purpose. And God may have placed you here for this purpose. Maybe you're in a place now that is not even pleasant to be in. But look for God's overall purpose in the place that you are in right now. We're in chapter 5. 3 days of fasting are up. Esther is waiting at the palace court for the king to notice her. The tension is thick. This is the moment of truth. Look at verses 2 and 3. As soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the courtyard, she won his approval. And the king extended his golden scepter and his hand towards Esther, and she approached and touched the tip of the scepter. "What is it, Queen Esther?" the king asked her. "Whatever you want, even half of the kingdom will be given to you." So she obtains favor in his sight. The psalmist says, just in case you think that the world's powers, the bosses, are lording over you, listen to this. The proverb says in Proverb 21:1, "The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. Like the rivers of water, he turns it whatever way he wishes." That's our God. Okay? Well, Esther must have had a sigh of relief as the king holds that scepter forward. The king was in a good mood, offered her as much as half of the kingdom. And here's what Esther asked for. "I'd like a dinner party for 3. Myself, you, and the evil Haman." All right, so during this dinner party, though, Esther hesitates to tell the king about Haman's plot. Maybe the timing was wrong. Maybe she chickened out. Maybe the delay was providential. So Esther, at the end of that meal, requests a second banquet, a second party the next day. Well, Haman is so happy about this. He feels like he's been accepted into this social circle until he passes Mordecai. In verse 9, that day, Haman left full of joy and in good spirits. But when Haman saw Mordecai at the king's gate, and Mordecai did not rise, tremble, and feel at his presence, Haman was filled with rage towards Mordecai. So hate just rages inside of this guy. And even good news of being invited to the second dinner party, he just can't get the thoughts of disrespect out of his mind. But his family knows what makes Haman happy, and it's twisted. Look at verse 14. His wife Zeresh and all his friends told him, "Have them build a gallows 75 feet high, which is 3 times the normal height. Ask the king in the morning to hang Mordecai on it. Then go to the banquet with the king and enjoy yourself." The advice pleased Haman, so he had the gallows constructed. Very, very twisted guy. So we're in chapter 6, and it just so happens that the king has God-given insomnia. Look at verses 1 through 3. And on the that night, in chapter 6. Sleep escaped the king, so he ordered the book recording daily events to be brought and read to the king. And they found the written report of how Mordecai had informed on Bigthana and Teresh, 2 eunuchs who guarded the king's entrance, and they planned an assassination of King Ahasuerus. The king inquired what honor and special recognition has been given Mordecai for this act, and the king's personal attendants replied, nothing has been done for him. So sometimes when you can't sleep, you resort to reading. And the most boring thing possible is these official records. And so as he was probably half asleep and listening to this account, what's been done for this guy who saved my life? Nothing. So just then, Haman walks into the outer courtroom and hears them discussing how they can honor Mordecai, but he doesn't know it. He thinks they're talking about him, and he has a total different agenda. He is coming to the king to ask the king to kill the guy the king wants to honor. So look at verse 6. Haman entered, and the king asked, what should be done for the man the king wants to honor? Well, Haman thought to himself, who is it the king would want to honor more than me? And so he's just prideful, and he's swollen with pride and thinks the king. So he starts to talk about all the things he would like to have done to himself. Well, the honoree should wear royal clothing, and she'd have the royal horse, and a crown should be given to him, and a formal presentation be made by a high-ranking official, and let the people honor him publicly, and the honoree should be paraded all throughout the kingdom. Verse 10. The king told Haman, hurry, do just as you propose. Take a garment and the horse for Mordecai the Jew who is sitting at the king's gate. Do not leave anything you suggested out. Well, pride goes before destruction, and an arrogant spirit before a fall. This is a reversal of epic proportion. Not only was Mordecai going to get the honor that Haman thought he deserved, but to add insult to injury, Haman would have to carry it out to the point of parading in front of Mordecai, saying he's the man. So Haman is crushed emotionally. He goes home to his wife and friends. It's difficult, but he gets his emotions together, and he attends this second dinner party with Esther and the king. And we're in chapter 7. The time is right. Esther knows in her spirit she needs to proceed. We know in our spirit when it's time to tell our friend about Christ. The Spirit prompts us. We have spiritual discernment that prompts us when it's a good time to approach the boss. So for the third time, the king offers the Queen Esther as much as half of the kingdom, and the timing's right. Esther reveals Haman's plot and to destroy all her people. Haman must have been sweating bullets as Esther points her finger at Haman. Did I mention that Ahasuerus had a reputation for having an unstable temper? He does. Look at verse 9 and 10. And Harbona, one of the royal eunuchs, said, there's a gallows 75 feet tall at Haman's house that he made for Mordecai, who gave the report that saved the king. The king commanded, hang him on it. And they hanged Haman on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's anger subsided. That's a reversal of justice. It really is. This is like providential irony, as Haman's going to be hung on the 75-foot gallows he prepared for Mordecai. Listen to the psalmist. The Lord is known by his acts of justice. The wicked are ensnared by their hands. And that's exactly what happened. We're in chapter 8. Well, there's a reversal of position. God makes Mordecai the prime minister. The king gives Mordecai the signet ring that he had given Haman, but we still have a problem. There's that Persian decree to kill all the Jews on March 13th. Well, Esther makes her appeal to the king to change it, but the king reminds her he can't change a Persian decree, but he does give her the power to write her own along with Mordecai. So there'll be a reversal of decrees in chapter 8, verse 11. It says, and the king's edict gave the Jews, each and every city, the right to assemble and defend themselves, destroy, kill, and annihilate every ethnic and providential army hostile to them, including women and children, and take their possessions as spoil of war. So they were given the right to defend themselves. And there's a reversal of fate here in chapter 9, verse 1. And the king's command and the law went into effect on the 13th day of the 12th month, in the month of Adar. On that day, when the Jews' enemies had hoped to overpower them, just the opposite happened. The Jews overpowered those who hated them. In each of King Ahasuerus' province, the Jews assembled in their cities and attacked those who intended to do them harm. Incredible. You know, that fateful day comes, March 13th, 473 BC, and the tide had changed. You know, the psalmist again says, "You turn my lamenting into dancing. You remove my sackcloth and clothe me in gladness." There's a reversal of circumstances where from mourning to celebration, as Mordecai institutes the Feast of Purim, which is still celebrated today, by the way, in March. Purim is from the word pur, to cast a lot. Purim literally means a reversal of a lot cast. So look at verse 20 and 22. Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to all the Jews in King Ahasuerus' province, both near and far. He ordered them to celebrate the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar each year, because during those days the Jews got rid of their enemies. That was the month when their sorrow was turned to rejoicing and their mourning into a holiday. There were the days of feasting and rejoicing and sending gifts one to another and the poor. So I guess what I want to ask you today, sitting here today, listening, do you need a God-sized reversal in your life? Do you need a God-sized reversal? You know, it seems like the powerful have the final say over us and our lives. But remember, God will intervene and overrule in the affairs of man. God will have his way. God is in charge. God can do a reversal in your life, just like he did for Esther and her people. You know, it was looking pretty grim there with God's people. You know, to be honest, the Bible is grim about all of us. It says that all have sinned and fallen short. There's none righteous, no, not one. How can we reconcile with God knowing this? Well, God can do a spiritual reversal in your life today. A spiritual reversal. You know, in God's providence, we saw a political reversal from the evil Haman to the righteous Mordecai. We saw a legal reversal with Mordecai's official letter giving the Jews the right to defend themselves. We saw an emotional reversal from mourning of chapters 3 and 4 to the celebration of chapters 8 and 9. And there was a holy reversal from godlessness to God honoring, from hiding one's faith to embracing one's faith. And I want you to remember this. Satan thought that he had Jesus beat on the cross at Calvary. But early that Sunday morning, God raised Jesus from the dead, and Jesus said, "All power is given to me." There is an eternal reversal for you. Eternal reversal. Do you ever wonder why, if God made you for a purpose, for such a time of this or that? You know, what about, here's something I thought about. Is it possible that God made Esther beautiful for this purpose? Is that the reason she was beautiful? What about you? Are you beautiful? Are you tall? Are you strong? Are you fast? Maybe you're athletic. Maybe you have musical ability. Maybe your brain works just a little bit quicker than the people around you. Maybe you make friends really easily and you have a great patience with people. Maybe you have a sense of humor that can ease tension. God has a plan for you in this place, for this time, for this moment, for his kingdom purpose, for such a time as this. You know, Esther could be compared to a chess game. You know, you think about God and Satan as the invisible players moving kings and queens and nobles and everyday people. When Satan put Haman in place, he announced check. When God positioned Esther and Mordecai in place, it was checkmate. You know, while God is not mentioned here in the book of Esther, he's everywhere. opposing evil, foiling Satan's plans and schemes. It's a providential reversal. So I know your life may get shaky from time to time, but I want you to remember, and I know I've said it before, God will intervene and overrule in the affairs of man. God will have his way. Let's pray.